I am giving you an outline of what I intend to discuss. As you know, this is being recorded, and so to make it a little bit easier for those who come back to this recording, you have some idea of where you might find certain information. We're going to talk about the common mistakes in drafting the budget. We'll talk about major points in the evaluation process, key steps in budget drafting process. We'll talk about the funding categories and the use of funds. Actually, it's the ineligible use of funds, budget documentation, understanding the finance charts, in-kind contribution, and we'll share some final thoughts and we'll have the questions at the end. Common mistakes. We're going to deal with the common mistakes first. And the reason we're going to deal with the common mistakes first is because our mission is to help you get your money, get the money you desire, get the money you need for your programming. The Mercer County Division on Culture and Heritage, they want you to have this money. And so we want to help you make that happen. First common mistake, applicants, applicant does not read the instructions thoroughly. I know it sounds simplistic, but in order to understand what is needed and what the priorities are of your grantor, you really need to read the grant package you receive thoroughly. Uh, Second, there's often confusion between the special projects grant and the operating support grant. So we'll talk about that a little bit, but you need to be clear on what grant you're applying for. And this is for both the LAP and the historic grants. Another common mistake is the failure to fill in the totals on the budget charts. Now, we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but essentially, it's filling out all of the numbers but not putting in the totals, uh, which then, of course, means that there is some expectation that the individuals reviewing that grant they're going to fill in the totals for the applicant. Not a good assumption. Uh, the applicant neglects to identify how the funds will be used. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we look at the finance charts. There's a specific section which asks the applicant to break out the use of the funds, showing a budget that is not balanced. So sometimes the applicant may show a budget that has a deficit. This may be well and good for the current projected income, but when you're asking for money for a project, one of the things that the applicant must show is that the project is viable and that the applicant can afford the project. So every once in a while, someone shows a deficit, which raises the question, of course, well, why should the county give this applicant money if this applicant can't afford to do the project? So you really would like to have your budget balanced. Again, particularly your projected budget for the year of the grant. Budget's not consistent with the narrative. So this year, we'll be asking, or rather, the county will be asking for narratives in a series of questions. Um, Many of you may know that previously the county asked for one big narrative. Well, those questions are should match the budget, or the answer to those questions, excuse me, should match your budget, and the budget should match the narrative. Uh, and a slight addendum to that is that you will probably should look at your social media to make sure that your social media matches your narrative and that the budget matches what you show on the social media. And it's just for example, if you are spending money for diversity, equity, and your social media doesn't show any people of color, then you're not matching, your narrative is not matching your budget. Um, Budget does not show where income is coming from. This is a particular issue for some Mercer County Community College units that may assume that the county understands that some of their money is coming from a department within the Mercer County College community. That is not an assumption that the review panel members will make, and that is not an assumption that the committee will make. They will send that application back to you. So you should always show where the income is coming from to support your project. Applications do not show cash matches. And we'll talk a little bit more about cash matches later. Um, and the final mistake, which no one has made yet, because it's new, is $7,000 is the limit that you are allowed to request. So on your application, obviously, don't request more than $7,000 because then obviously your budget will not work. A little note on the evaluation process, just so that you know, have a better understanding of how this works. So for both grants, the historic and the LAP grants, your application is first reviewed by panel members. And then after it's reviewed by panel members and they make their recommendations, they may make those recommendations in conjunction with the Mercer County Cultural and Heritage Commission. Then those recommendations are ultimately sent to the county administrators. When the panelists receive your application, there are certain things they must look at. And so I've highlighted the two that are related to the budget for you. One, they're required to look at your budget as reasonable, to determine whether it's reasonable, how you're going to use the funds, and your ability to to raise funds for the special project. So if you, I'm sure you're hearing me that this is why I went through the mistakes first, because we want to have an application that addresses these concerns. The reviewers are also looking for need, promise, and potential of the organization or project, and the capability of the group to follow through. And just to reiterate, the capability to follow through, that's one of the reasons you don't want to show a deficit. Just offers some key steps in drafting a budget. Um, just something to think about. I would start again by thoroughly reading the guidelines, gather your necessary and relevant documentation first, determine what your funding category is. Is it going to be for operating support or is this a special project? Uh, know your narrative, draft your narrative, complete your financial charts, and then double and triple check your numbers. Uh, Say that one more time. Please double and triple check your numbers. Funding categories. Let's talk about the funding categories for a little bit. So applicants may apply for either a general operating support or special project support. For the general operating support, the maximum amount of the grant funds an organization may request is 30% of the average of last year and the current year total operating income not to exceed 7,000. So let me just dig into that just a little bit. So they're asking for the current year operating income, which will show up, which you will put into your financial chart. That'd be financial chart number two, which I'll show you. And they're asking for the previous year income, which does not show up in your papers. So the county is saying to you, we're trusting you for the most part. We're trusting you to use the last year numbers and add that number to this year's operating income, divide those by two so that you have the average, and you can apply for 30% of that average, not to exceed $7,000. If I went too fast or haven't been clear on that, I'll try to repeat myself later, or you can ask questions about it. But it's the average of those 2 years, one of those years, which will not show up in your documentation. Although I should note that for those grantees that have applied before, the county has those numbers. So special project support. For special project support, the maximum allowable request would be 50% or less of the total estimated expense budget for that specific project. There are matching requirements for each of those grants. Simple for the general operating support grant, it requires a one-to-one cash match. And it says, for example, an organization requesting $1,000 must show at least $1,000 cash match in the budget. Your special projects grant is a little bit different. You must show a one-to-one match. However, up to 50% of the grant match can be from in-kind goods and services. We'll talk about that a little bit more, uh, and we'll talk about how you show your in-kind match. Ineligible use of LAP grant funds. There's also in your documentation, if you're doing historic grants, and ineligible uses for those grants. And so I'm just going to generally go over these. It appears in the paperwork. But ineligible would be capital improvements and acquisitions, hospitality costs, I guess obviously not paying for someone's hotel, travel outside of New Jersey and foreign travel, fundraising events. So fundraising events might be a little bit tricky, and this might be one instance where you want to call the Division of Culture and Heritage if your fundraising event is actually a special project that happens to be to do fundraising. That because you want to be clear that it's not really solely that it's not a fundraising event, but perhaps it's a project that raises funds or as part of a fundraising campaign. Uh, Scholarship funds, fellowships. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about budget documentation. This is applicable not only to the LAP grants, but also to the historic grants. Organizations applying for the first time for the grants must provide a copy of the previous year's tax return to the IRS and a letter from the accountant certifying the expenses for the previous year. Organizations that received a grant in the previous year only need to supply the accountant's letter. You don't need to supply the IRS document unless there's been some major financial changes in your organization. Other documentation includes your whatever you need for your narrative to support your budget. As a matter of fact, there are very specific questions in the narrative about how you're going to use your funds and what results come out of those funds or what your expectations are. Okay, understanding the finance charts. This is the really fun, exciting part. There are three charts in your package. That's chart number one, expenses, chart number two, income, and an in-kind chart. The expense chart, you'll notice, has three columns. The first column is for your current projected expenses. Your second column is your projected expenses for which you are going to request grant funds. The last column is the projected expenses, but this is solely for how you're going to use your grant funds. No other numbers need to go in this column, but the money you expect to receive from the grant funds. And at the bottom, they should add up to what you are requesting. Uh, I've seen, unfortunately, in a couple of instances where the number requested on one page is not the same as the number requested here. That's quite problematic, and why I suggest that you look it over two or three times to make sure that there's consistency there. Your income. Your income chart has only two columns. Excuse me. Uh, your fiscal year current income and your projected income. There are three sections: your earned income, your contributed income, and your applicant cash. That's line 44, line 56, and line 63 should add up to line 64. We'll talk a little bit more about the applicant cash and forwarding surpluses in a second. So this is an expense chart with an error that I was talking about before. Here you'll see that the total cash expenses are there, but there's no indication how that money is being used in relationship to the middle column. So what should be there is numbers in that column related to the middle column. And actually what I'm noticing right now, again, another problem with this particular application is that the totals are not added up in either year. I really can't tell you how frustrating that is for the panel members because they would really like to give this organization money without having to send this application back. Another error, which we talked about before, is at the bottom with a deficit of $125. And I actually laughed slightly because when I first started uh, practicing bankruptcy, I made the same mistake. And in my mind, I'm telling the bankruptcy judge, look, we're $125 in deficit, really should prove that we don't have the money and we really need your money. Yeah, right. Um, no, this would be better with a balanced budget to show that you can actually do this program. Or your panel members might be sitting at the table laughing and say somebody needs to get that $125 out of their pocket and put it on this chart. Applicant cash. So this is correct. I cite this because I want to suggest to you that if you have surplus from a previous year, if your surplus from your program or your for operating costs, it actually should show up in applicant cash. So it is a carryover. So if you have surplus, that actually should be part of your projected. And if you make that error and the panel sees that there is surplus from the previous year, there becomes a question of whether they should be adding that and whether that changes your numbers, that changes your narrative, and that changes whether you possibly need the money from the county. So that again, just to be clear, I suggest that there's a surplus from the previous year you want to carry it over. In-kind contributions. Now, this chart is where you give value to the goods and services that you receive, your volunteers, your administrative help, rental costs, et cetera. And this is where you break it down. And I'm going to go back a couple of charts because I want to show you something. Okay, so in your income, for me, and I actually don't know if there's an absolute correct answer to this, but your and perhaps Chelsea or someone else will help me at the end about this. But your in-kind income should show up on your income chart. And that chart is simply to break down your in-kind income. Now, the issue I'm not sure about is in which of these groupings it should appear. Personally, I would put them in either the contributed or the applicant cash, which to me would not make a difference except that the numbers must ultimately be correct. And so, to be more specific, I probably put it in line 54, just say in kind, put the number in the projected, or 60 and put the number in the projected. And then that allows the panel to simply go to the in-kind chart to break it down. And if I wasn't clear on that, please just ask me questions about that later. So this is a really good example of a breakdown of in-kind contributions. One of the issues that may come up for you, and I know it's come up for me from time to time, is how do you value the time of your volunteers? Or how do you value, yeah, let's say certain volunteers. You want to know the hours that your volunteers work and then multiply that probably by some type of hourly wage number. I have no suggestions for you in that regard. I think different institutions might have requirements for different numbers. Mercer County Division of Culture and Heritage does not have specific requirements regarding those numbers, but I just suggest that to you so that you have an idea that, look, your volunteers are valued. And it's great that you can use 50%, use this as a 50% match. So if this is, so here, um, I don't remember what this particular match was required, but 11,000 is probably a great number for any match. Final thoughts. Uh, the county wants to support your work. I, we're doing this hopefully to make this easier for you uh, to get the support that you need. And we happen to have the most robust arts community in the country, this state. And we in Mercer County probably have the best arts community in the state. And we want to keep it that way. So, guys, thank you very much for allowing me to present to you, and hopefully, the things that I've shared were helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Reinhold, and thank you everybody for coming on today. I know that there are two questions that are in the chat right now. So I just wanted to help answer them if that's all right. Kathy, I saw that you asked a question about special projects applicants and about which columns they needed to fill out for the charts. I believe you were asking about the expense chart. In that regard, sometimes we have, and Reinhold, if you want to jump in with this as well, special projects, sometimes there are special projects that are permanent special projects within organizations, meaning that you have this project happen regularly throughout every year. And if that is the case, then you could fill out the current projected fiscal year 25 column in your expenses because you may have a current projected of this specific project. And if you do not currently have this project going, and if it's a brand new project you're applying for, then you really would only be able to fill out the projected expenses and fiscal year 26 projected expenses as well. I hope that helps answer that question and it clarifies some things. And then, Joanne, I see that you asked a question about membership income and putting that under individual contributions, and that's correct. You can assume you could put that there. Um, and yes, we are going to, sorry, outside. We're going to have, this is being recorded right now, as well as our grant writing workshop and the upcoming ADA workshops, are all going to be recorded and they're going to be available on the county website. I'll be sure to send everyone who's registered the link. We just kind of have to go through a long process in approvals to get that up on the website. But everything, the presentation, if Reinhold, if you could send that to me, I could also publish that with this recording and
Absolutely.
make it available. But if there's no are there any questions, or if Reinhold, if there's nothing else you want to say, thank you,
No,
everyone.
I just hope it's helpful. That's all.
Yep. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.